When demand falls, prices are supposed to follow suit. That's just how the markets work. But right now, demand for consumer electronics is in the toilet. So, why do prices keep rising? The memory in your next smartphone costs 230% more than last year's model, despite smartphone sales falling. And this can only mean that something's broken in the supply chain, or someone's breaking it deliberately. My name is Nick, and this is Coin Bureau Finance. Before we get into it, nothing in this video is financial advice. It's just our read on the market forces pricing you out of all the new electronics that you didn't plan on buying this year anyway. And if you find our videos useful, smash that like button, and let's dig in. So, apparently, there's a semiconductor shortage that's taken the world by storm. Yes, another one. Just like the chip shortages that blew up the price of electronics during the pandemic, or the crypto miner chip shortages, or the chip shortages for the car industry, it's always the same excuse for price hikes, always temporary. We almost zoned out hearing about the millionth chip shortages this decade, been there, paid that TSMC tax. But, as it turns out, this time might be different. Because this time, the bottleneck is a physical constraint we've never seen before. See, every semiconductor begins life as a 300mm silicon wafer. Manufacturers can slice that wafer into memory chips for consumer electronics, or they can use it for AI infrastructure. What they can't do is both. The industry doesn't have unlimited wafer capacity. It's a fixed resource that gets allocated based on profitability. South Korea's SK Hynix and the United States' Micron have shifted around 20 to 30% of their total production capacity toward high bandwidth memory, or HBM, the advanced chips that go into NVIDIA's Blackwell and upcoming Rubin AI accelerators. The problem is that HBM is not just a regular semiconductor with souped up specs and for AI printed on the box. It's a fundamentally different product with a fundamentally different manufacturing process. And one of the biggest differences is how it consumes wafer capacity. Whereas standard memory chips are manufactured as flat single-layer dies on a wafer, one chip per spot arranged in a row, HBM takes those dies and stacks them vertically, 8 or 12 layers high. And these stacks are created by vertically drilling microscopic holes through the layers in an extremely delicate process called through-silicon via. Yields are lower than standard single-layer production because any defect in any layer ruins the entire stack. A speck of dust in layer 7 means you throw away all 12 layers. And because the dies are larger and the process more complex, each HBM wafer produces fewer functional chips than a wafer making regular memory for phones and laptops. The result is that HBM takes about 3 times as much wafer capacity per bit of memory produced. So, when Samsung allocates 20% of their plant space to HBM, it's not at the expense of a 20% reduction in the consumer chip output. Try a cut of 60% or more, because HBM production eats wafer at triple the rate while producing a fraction of the total memory bits. And once the memory is actually made, it needs to be connected to a GPU. And to do that, manufacturers rely on TSMC's chip-on-wafer-on-substrate, or CoWoS process. And right now, TSMC's CoWoS capacity is the most expensive real estate in the global economy. And if you aren't NVIDIA, you're not getting in. Both SK Hynix and Micron have completely sold out their 2026 HBM production capacity, all scooped up by the usual suspects. NVIDIA, Google, Meta, and Microsoft wrote checks that cleared the entire production capacity before the first wafer was even started. And these are prepaid contracts locked in for the full year. So even if consumer demand suddenly spiked tomorrow, manufacturers couldn't shift capacity back. The wafers are already promised, and the capacity is fully booked. And this hasn't really happened before. In previous business cycles, falling smartphone sales created a predictable feedback loop. Manufacturers would find themselves with excess inventory, panic, and slash prices to move chips. And that competitive undercutting would keep prices suppressed until demand recovered. But that mechanic has been severed. AI infrastructure spending has created what the industry calls a black hole for supply. Demand's so ferocious it absorbs any slack from the consumer side instantly. When phone sales fall, the freed up capacity is immediately sucked up by the data center industry. The consumer electronics market used to be the bedrock of semiconductor manufacturing, the stable, high-volume demand that kept plants running. But in 2026, it's been demoted, left to pick up whatever crumbs of capacity are left after AI infrastructure demand has been satisfied. And speaking of getting the leftovers, if you want to stay ahead of the market shifts like this chip shortage before they empty your wallet, we've put together a weekly newsletter that breaks down the biggest stories in finance. And we've also got some exclusive finance-related deals for viewers of this channel. Just click the link in the description or scan this QR code. The newsletter is free and the deals are exclusively for you. Worth checking out. So the data center boom is real, and it's hogging a lot of semiconductor manufacturing capacity. Supply is genuinely tight, but is it 70% gross margin tight? Or are manufacturers using real scarcity as an excuse to juice their margins? The financial evidence suggests both things are simultaneously happening. Micron is projecting gross margins of around 67 to 68% for the current fiscal year. Now, to understand what this means, you need the context on what normal looks like in the physical memory business. During market gluts like 2019, when manufacturers overbuilt capacity, gross margins drop to around 10 to 15%. Companies are selling chips below the cost of the depreciation on the equipment that made them, just to keep the factories running. During genuine supply shortages, like 2018 when demand briefly outstripped capacity, margins climb to 40 to 45%. Manufacturers are making healthy profits, but they're pricing at levels that reflect scarcity without completely rinsing the consumer. Margins above 60% have historically only appeared in one context: proven cartel behavior. When manufacturers coordinate to restrict supply and fix prices, margins spike to levels that have no relationship to production costs. A 68% margin is a file under cartel territory. Meanwhile, Samsung Semiconductor Division just posted a 160% jump in Q4 operating profit year over year. Record performance, extraordinary margins. But when you look at Samsung Mobile, they're reporting squeezed margins during the same period. Same parent company, opposite financial trajectories. Now, if this were just savvy external pricing, Samsung Mobile should benefit. They're buying memory from Samsung Semiconductor. Internal transfer pricing should give them an advantage, or at the very least shield them from market rates. But it doesn't. Samsung Mobile pays the same inflated prices as Apple, Xiaomi, and everyone else. This proves the shortage has genuine structural weight. It's not purely a coordinated price hike, because supply is so tight that Samsung can't even give itself a break. On the other hand, scarcity doesn't quite explain the death of the long-term agreement. Historically, major customers like Dell, Apple, and Lenovo locked in annual or multi-year supply contracts at negotiated rates. It was boring, stable, and enabled predictable prices for things like RAM upgrades. But at this point, memory suppliers have effectively killed the long-term agreement. Samsung and SK Hynix are kicking even their biggest clients onto quarterly pricing. And considering that they've already sold out of all of 2026, it's not because they can't forecast supply. A more persuasive explanation is because quarterly contracts let them raise prices 4 times a year. They just hiked server DRAM prices 60 to 70% for Google and Microsoft. These are customers with effectively infinite budgets and maximum negotiating leverage. If hyperscalers are getting quarterly spot pricing with no long-term protection, smaller manufacturers are completely exposed. And so it was that the long-term semiconductor supply agreement was laid to rest, and the entire consumer economy was exposed to spot market volatility on purpose, and the margins were good. Amen. But there's a legal pressure building too. The US International Trade Commission has opened an investigation not into price fixing, but into patent infringement allegations by Netlist against Samsung and SK Hynix. If Netlist wins, it could lead to import bans on the very chips America is so short of. Somehow, though, no major economy has formally accused the memory oligopoly of price coordination. The EU and China have made noises about antitrust scrutiny, but don't appear to be investigating. And the suppliers don't really need any smoky rooms or secret deals to fix prices, just a shared incentive to keep HBM lines running and legacy lines starved. So, real shortage, real price gouging. HBM displacing non-HBM chipmaking capacity creates genuine supply constraints. And manufacturers are exploiting that constraint to extract margins that would trigger formal investigations in any normal cycle. Well, that's good to know. So how much is that next donation to chipmaker margins going to cost you? Let's see. Apple is notorious for charging consumers eye-watering prices for memory upgrades while enjoying long-term supply agreements that keep its own production costs low. But now those agreements are history, and they're paying a 230% premium for the RAM going into the new iPhone 17. Last generation, a 12GB memory module cost around $25 per unit. This time, Apple is paying $70 for the same capacity. That's a $45 increase to the bill of materials just for RAM. And Apple uses that memory across the entire iPhone 17 range, so the cost hit applies to millions of units. Samsung, meanwhile, is reportedly planning a $40 to $60 price increase for the Galaxy S26 in certain markets, with memory and storage component costs cited as the primary driver. Realistically, none of this really matters for Apple and Samsung because of their pricing power. Their customers will grumble about higher prices, tweet about the Apple tax, and then buy the phone anyway because the ecosystem lock-in is too strong to escape. The mid-range market, however, doesn't have that luxury, not least because a big part of its appeal is that it's more affordable than Apple and Samsung. And this year, the bill for materials for mid-tier smartphones is expected to rise by about 25% due to the memory costs alone. Meanwhile, total global smartphone shipments are expected to drop 2.6%. And if you're a manufacturer in the $300 to $600 price bracket, you can't just pass these costs on without bleeding market share to competitors. But neither can you absorb a 25% increase in the cost of materials without destroying your own margins. In this market, one possible outcome is a shiny new memory downgrade. Flagship models, maybe not. But watch the specs on the more affordable phones this year, say Samsung's Galaxy A series or Xiaomi's Redmi. Just when you thought the 8GB RAM and 128GB starter pack was being phased out, manufacturers might try and pull a U-turn and try to sell you a 6GB RAM and slower storage instead, just to keep the price under $400. Industry analysts are warning that smartphones and PCs could cost up to 20% more across categories in 2026. Whether that manifests as direct stickier price increases or hidden spec downgrades, it sounds like consumers will be paying much more for less. So, a K-shaped consumer electronics market it is then. The iPhone 17 Pro costs more, the Galaxy S26 Ultra costs more, and the price is right there on the website. But if you're a mid-range buyer, you'll be paying the same price for worse specs, and you don't realize you've been downgraded until the phone starts struggling with basic multitasking 6 months in. Either way, you're subsidizing the AI boom. Your phone costs more so that Google and Meta can stockpile HBM for data centers. But if your phone is the only thing that requires upgrading this year, you can count your lucky stars because the PC market is where max pain will be felt. It's facing the same memory shortage, but during a forced upgrade cycle. Microsoft ended support for Windows 10 in October 2025. Corporate IT departments that delayed hardware refreshes through the early decade now have no choice. Millions of enterprise machines need replacement in 2026, and running unsupported operating systems creates unacceptable security risks. And corporate procurement happens 6 to 12 months in advance of the actual deployment. So the purchasing decisions for 2026 upgrades were being made in late 2025 based on pricing that no longer exists. The replacement machines have hugely increased memory requirements. Microsoft's Copilot Plus PC specifications mandate a 16 to 32GB of RAM for AI-enhanced Windows features, double the 8 GB standard that dominated enterprise deployments over the past 5 years. So demand is spiking just as supply is collapsing, and the demand isn't optional. It's driven by an operating system end of life that IT departments can't negotiate around. Since December, both Dell and Lenovo have implemented price increases of 15 to 20% for enterprise customers who were apparently given less than 1 month's notice. And that won't have gone down well with customers' CFOs, since corporate IT procurement operates on annual budget cycles. They approved their 2026 hardware budgets months ago based on pricing assumptions from mid-2025. Those budgets assumed incremental increases, maybe 3 to 5%, in line with historical trends. A 15 to 20% jump knocks those assumptions right out of the park. So, IT departments are now facing shortfalls. They have the budget to refresh maybe 10,000 machines, but at new prices, they can only afford 8,500. The remaining 1,500 employees either keep running Windows 10 past end of life, accepting the security risks, or the company scrambles to cough up the cash from somewhere else. International Data Corporation, a major tech market research firm, is warning the PC market could contract 5 to 9% in 2026 due to memory pricing alone. Clearly, that's not for lack of demand, since Microsoft axing Windows 10 has created a desperate cohort of corporate customers. The problem is prices have risen faster than budgets can adapt. You couldn't have asked for a more perfect squeeze. A mandatory OS upgrade that requires double the RAM hitting at exactly the moment RAM prices have exploded and supply has vanished. Any one of these factors alone would be manageable. All three together create a car crash for IT departments, who are forced to buy more expensive components they can't afford for machines they can't delay. Now, we've talked a lot about memory chips, but the supply chain fragility actually runs much deeper. Last year, the Dutch government forced the breakup of Nexperia, a major manufacturer of automotive-grade power management chips and diodes. Now, these are commodity semiconductors that regulate voltage in everything from car charging systems to industrial equipment to USB power adapters. They don't make for such snappy headlines as the memory shortage story covered in tech media, but that forced split disrupted existing supply contracts and created allocation uncertainty precisely when car manufacturers were trying to recover from previous chip shortages. The affected components are nothing cutting edge, but cars need thousands of them per vehicle. A single missing diode can stop an entire production line. And now S&P Global is warning that car makers' supply chains are at risk as chip suppliers increasingly prioritize AI data center customers over automotive contracts. It's not hard to see why. Car makers are low-margin, high-volume customers with brutal price negotiations. Data centers are high-margin customers willing to pay whatever the quarterly spot price demands. When manufacturers have to choose which orders to fill, they're choosing the data centers. The car industry is left scavenging for the same leftovers as consumer electronics. Another wild card in the picture is geopolitics. China suspended export controls on gallium, germanium, and antimony in late 2025 as part of the broader trade negotiations with the United States. But the suspension only runs through November 2026. These materials are critical for making semiconductors for specialized applications from EV charging systems to military hardware. Standard silicon can't handle these applications, and guess who controls the overwhelming majority of global processing capacity for these materials? Any American company building a product architecture today that depends on Chinese gallium supply is operating under a ticking clock. If trade negotiations break down and the export controls snap back in 11 months, those supply chains are toast. And finally, helium. Semiconductor fabrication plants consume enormous quantities of helium for cooling during advanced lithography processes. And what do you know? The global helium market is in structural deficit. Production is concentrated in a handful of natural gas fields. Unlike silicon, you can't just build a factory to make more helium. It's a non-renewable byproduct of natural gas extraction. So if a gas field in Qatar goes offline or the US Bureau of Land Management tightens supply, chip makers can't run their most advanced production lines. All of these vulnerabilities are interconnected single points of failure. A manufacturer could solve the memory shortage, secure wafer capacity, and still get screwed by helium scarcity or a foreign policy failure. So, there you have it. The chip shortage is real and fake at the same time. HBM production consumes 3 times the wafer capacity of standard memory. Manufacturers have sold out that capacity through 2026, and the zero-sum displacement of consumer chip production is measurable and structural. But Micron hitting 68% gross margins, Samsung posting 160% profit growth, suppliers refusing to offer long-term agreements to even their largest customers, this is plainly a semiconductor oligopoly using its pricing power to max extract from a captive market. They're laughing all the way to the bank, but so would you if you had been long memory capacity for the last year. Perhaps that gold rally was a distraction from the really big trade that almost everyone missed. Well, if you want to learn more about the winners and losers of the AI wealth transfer, you can do so by watching our video on that right over here. That's all from me now. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.